Let's get going, shall we? So hello everyone, afternoon. Like I said, my name is Matt. If you've been joining the previous GreenJam events, you'll know that I am the fairly new MD at the Alliance of Independent Agencies, and I get to host all these lovely events that take place every 2 weeks. So GreenJam is a regular event that runs every 2 weeks. That's specifically, and it was originally geared and invented, shall we say, to help people in the first few years of agency life. But we tend to attract a really nice eclectic mix now because the content's often so good. But we've had all sorts of speakers and experts come and join us to impart their knowledge. And we're really guided by you, the people that join. So after this call, if you have any ideas on future GreenJam topics, please send them through. This was actually one of them, and that's why I think it's proved so popular. We've still got lots of people joining now. Coming up, every 2 weeks, like I said, the next one is we're going to focus on what TikTok is as a platform, understand how it can work for marketers. And then in the beginning of December, I think it's the 5th or the 2nd of December, it will be online. We have the one and only Sir Martin Sorrell joining us to talk to anybody that's thinking about what their career looks like over the next few years in agencies. But today we're going to talk about copywriting, and I've got two amazing speakers that have come to join us. We've got Alex Goldstein and Nick Padmore. Alex is the senior writer at Schwa, and Nick is the creative director at Schwa. And it's a really interesting consultancy. I've just been browsing, and they're in their website earlier on today. They do all sorts of things, including looking at behavioural science, the tone of voice, and of course today's hot subject is writing. So this is easy for me today. I just get to welcome you and jump off the stage and let Alex and Nick take to the floor because they're going to present to you. It's probably going to take, I think, Alex and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, about half an hour, 30 minutes. But we'll have time for questions later on. Really good thing to do is if you're thinking of any questions, just pop them in the chat. It's quite nice to see everybody's faces if the videos are on, but please put yourself on mute just to make it easier for Alex and Nick to present. But yeah, pop any questions in the chat room and I'll make sure that they get asked to Alex and Nick afterwards. If not, we'll go to the live chat room and you can just put your hand up and we'll let you speak. But that's really it for me now. Alex and Nick, if you're okay, I'm going to let you take to the floor.
Sounds good.
Are you there? Yeah, there you are. Great. Yeah. It's over to you, bro. Thanks everybody for joining. Enjoy.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to share a screen. Hopefully this works. And yes, Alex is going to get started.
I am. Well, actually, hopefully Matt has already done my first slide for me because this is us, Nick and Alex. And this is what we're going to be talking about today, which is how to spot good writing when you see it. So that you know that we know what we're talking about, I will give you a very, very quick introduction to who we are as an agency. So we are called Schwa. Is there anybody, out of curiosity, in the room who can quickly pop on their mic and tell me what a Schwa is? Does anyone know? Any bright sparks? It is a real word. It is in the dictionary. It is actually the name of a sound. It's the name of the most popular vowel, the most common vowel sound in English. And there isn't a letter for it because it shows up in lots of different letters. And it is actually the sound, It's not a very pleasant sound, but we use it all the time. So we are about to give a talk. Hopefully it is the first talk that you're hearing today so that you're not too zoned out. Hopefully you will take away some memory of the talk and we will supply some useful information. And the schwa even appears where there is no vowel at all. So in that second syllable of rhythm. So that's the schwa. We chose it partly because our co-founder Neil is a massive linguistics geek, but also because of a behavioral science effect called the bizarreness effect. So things that are a little bit unusual tend to stick in the mind. And behavioral science is one of the things that we do, as Matt mentioned. So two of the kind of big things that we often do are tone of voice. We do lots of other writing-y type stuff as well, but tone of voice, so getting a brand personality in words. And behavioral science, which a lot of the times can be things like nudgy comms, getting things into your writing to get people to behave differently, and sometimes changing processes as well to get people to do things that you would like them to do. So today we are actually going to look at what good writing looks like. The best way to do that is with some examples, but just to kind of keep you on board, there will be at the very end of this, the one brilliant golden rule that you can take away with you into every writing session or feedback session from now on. And from time to time, we may ask you to put your mic on and shout a few things out. So just be prepared to turn that back on, but we'll let you know when that's coming. And for the moment, I will hand over to Nick to start looking at what good writing looks like.
Yes, and I should also say we're going to give you a few rules, I guess, good tips for how you write well. But the golden rule, the number one golden rule, is right at the end. So you'll have to stick around for that one.
It's like a Marvel movie. Watch to the end of the credits.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to start with a memory test. So this is one of those moments where, as Alex said, we might need a little bit of audience participation from you. But first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a list of words, and I want you to try and remember as many of those words as you can. You won't be able to get all of them, but just as many as you can without writing down, without texting it to yourself, anything like that. So just try and commit these words to memory. Okay, it's a long list. Okay, here we go. Dream, bed, night, mattress, snooze, nod, tired, night, blanket, night, alarm, artichoke, nap, snore, pillow. Okay, now write down, if you've got a pen or paper, write as many of those as you can. Or if you've got your phone near you, just write them into there. Get as many as you can down. I'll give you a generous 30 seconds. I think I got about 4 when I did this.
I've got 5 so far.
You. Sorry, Alex?
I've got 5 so far. I'm not entirely sure I haven't made some of them up either.
Okay, I'll give you another 10 seconds. Okay, so should have a list now. Don't worry if you didn't get many, it's absolutely fine. There's not going to be any kind of exam. If you could now turn your microphones on or videos so that I can see your reaction. I want to know how many of you got the word dream. Put your hand up or put a virtual hand up or something like that so that I can tell. Yeah, seeing hands going up all around, thumbs up, perfect. Okay, so a lot of you got dream. So the reason you got dream is down to something that behavioural scientists call the primacy effect. So it was the first word in the list that I read out. And when we're presented with a list of information, we tend to just process, we tend to put extra brain power towards processing, memorizing the first item in the list. That's the primacy effect. How about pillow? Hands up if you got pillow. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing thumbs up, seeing hands up. Yeah, a lot of you got that. So the reason you got pillow is down to something called the recency effect, which is that it's the last thing I said. It was the last word on the list. So unsurprisingly, you're more likely to remember that because there wasn't very much time between having to remember it and me asking you to write them all down. So that's the recency effect. Third one is night. You got that? Thumbs up. Yeah. Okay, again, lots of you got night. That's repetition. You probably noticed I said it 3 times. If you give people a piece of information 3 times, they're a lot more likely to remember it, unsurprisingly. 2 more to go. How about artichoke? Hands up all round on artichoke. Yeah. I'm seeing, so you've got artichoke down to a brilliant behavioural science effect known as surprise or the bizarreness effect. So if you want someone to remember something, make it stand out from the crowd, make it do everything else that you've presented to them. And the last one is sleep. Who got sleep? One or two, not so many this time, but a few thumbs going up. So that is false memory. I didn't say the word sleep, but you were right to assume that I probably would have done, given that that was what all of the other words were about, apart from artichoke. So there's no blame here. That last one, it has no relevance to anything at all. Nasty little joke. So the point of going through all of those things is, first of all, just to explain what we mean by behavioural science. If it's not something that you're very aware of, then essentially it gives you a roadmap for how people process information. What sort of information is more likely to go in? What sort of information is more likely to bounce off? And it also, if you're a writer, it gives you a useful guide. And there are loads more effects that you can look at as well. But it gives you a useful guide for how to present your information, right? So if you know that people are more likely to remember the first and the last thing, then you make sure that those slots have really important information in them. And if you know that people remember things that surprise them, likewise, try and surprise people. Obviously repetition as well. So it gives you just a bit of help, because often when you're writing, it can feel a bit like you're sort of shooting in the dark. You're not quite sure, it's all very subjective. But what behavioral science does is it gives you a kind of scientific evidence for the sort of information that people do take in. And also, it helps you figure out that actually a lot of the writing that you see out there from businesses, from everyone, doesn't really pay attention to any of this stuff, unsurprisingly. It's full of what's called friction. And this is a really important concept for this presentation, but also generally as in writing. Psychological friction, what you don't want to create when you want to make things easy for people. And when I say friction, I'm just going to show you, give you an example of what I mean by that. So if you cast your minds back to a world where we were all in offices, it was so many months ago, maybe you had a fruit bowl in the office, maybe you didn't, but maybe you can imagine it. Probably it didn't have ginger in it. But by the by, this is just a illustrative picture, not an accurate one. Let's imagine that in that fruit bowl, you've got apples, oranges, and bananas. So I want thumbs up and hands up again. Who, if you go to the fruit bowl and you decide which of those things you want, who's choosing the apple? Yeah, pretty popular. Yeah. Getting a lot of thumbs up for apples. Okay, who's choosing the orange? Okay, yeah, a few of those, I would say fewer. And the banana? Okay, yeah, some thumbs up there. Feels like the apple's the winner to me from what I could see. So what's really weird is that if you look at juice sales by fruit, orange is way out ahead up there. It has 2/3 of the juice market. So there's something going on. Every time I've talked through this example, people always go for the apple and the banana, but they never go for the orange. And yet in juice form, we're all going for the orange. So there's something weird happening. And what's happening is friction, right? It's much harder to eat an orange than it is to eat an apple or a banana. An apple, you just eat it. Banana's got a handy handle on it. Whereas an orange, you've got to peel it back. You've got to get rid of all the pith, there's seeds in there that get in the way, all that stuff. So it stops us from choosing the orange. And the point of this is you don't actually have to have the most popular or the best product. You just have to make it easy for people to consume your product. That's what the orange juice shows. You know, it's much easier to eat a banana and an apple, and therefore they're being chosen more than oranges, even though we clearly like the flavor of oranges more. So I want to show you just a couple of examples of this friction in language now, because it's something that happens a lot. In a lot of the writing, if you imagine the letters you get through the post and any writing that you see out there, forms that you have to fill in, all that stuff, are really often terribly written and full of friction. They make your life hard when they shouldn't. And here's an example. The road sign: pedestrian, casualty, reduction, signal, timings, experiment. Does anyone want to weigh in on what's wrong with this piece of writing?
It's not very easy to absorb because the words are quite long and quite difficult to kind of pick up in just one glance. So you have to really concentrate.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and especially in this context where you're driving past at speed, you need that message to go straight in really easily. And you point out the longer words. That I think the fact that it's 6 nouns in a row is quite complicated for people. Usually that's not how sentences go. That's not the way that we read. But also, I think, and also the fact that they're quite complicated nouns as well. We don't really talk about reduction. We talk about things getting, fewer or whatever. So it's using words that people don't really use in real life very much. But the real culprit in this is the word signal. Because what this sign means, I think, is that they're changing the time between a red and a green light to see if that changes, makes any difference to the number of people who get hit by cars. Whereas the word I use there is signal, is traffic lights, but they use the word signal because that's the word that people in the Department for Transport or whoever put this out, that's the word that they use internally. So they haven't thought about the word that the audience uses. Whereas this one is a brilliant piece of writing. It could not be clearer than that. It uses words that you really use. It puts the message at exactly the right time as well. And it just makes life easy. It makes it easy to absorb the information as you're driving. So that's the difference between this is full of friction and this has had all the friction taken out. So this is not reader friendly. This is really reader friendly. And I think as a sort of summary to this point, it's worth keeping the wisdom of this man, Richard Thaler, in mind. So he's Richard Thaler. He's an economist, I guess, and he won the Nobel Prize for economics for his work on nudge theory, which is a sort of behavioral science. And he said this: if you want to encourage someone to do something, make it easy. And that's the basic idea that he won the Nobel Prize for. I mean, there's a lot more complex stuff going on as well, but that's the basic idea. And it sort of sounds so obvious, but no one's doing it out there. So if you want to encourage someone to do something with your writing, make your writing really easy to absorb, process, remember, all of that stuff. And there are 3 things, Alex and I think, that cause friction, that make it hard for people to take in a piece of writing. And they are wordiness, so just a word count, too much information. There's another principle of behavioral science called information bias, which is that we all have this weird tendency to want to throw more information at a problem because we think somehow that will help, whereas there's actually loads of evidence that people are better at making decisions based on less information. Counterintuitive, and we should fight the urge. So wordiness is the first problem that causes friction. Stuffiness is the second, and we're sort of using that as a quite a big blanket term, meaning everything that just feels old-fashioned and formal and just not human in the way that it's written. The last one is slightly less scientific: bullshittiness. So this is something that comes across maybe more in a marketing, advertising context, but you can imagine the brands that just communicate in a really inauthentic, just bullshitty way. So we've got examples. Alex is just going to take you through some examples of each of those things now. And then, yeah, so I'll hand over to you, Alex.
Yeah, let's have a look at some and try and work out, I think, where some of these things are coming from. So wordiness, I think, comes from a couple of things. Sometimes it's about maybe not wanting people to find information, and sometimes more about being uncomfortable with the information we're sharing. So the first example that we found, and this is from a couple of years ago, but I really don't think that it's got any better since then, is that social site terms, it's not just social, but all sorts of digital businesses and sites have terms and conditions and privacy policies that read like a Victorian novel. They're incredibly long, they're incredibly complex. For Spotify, they're beginning to rival Shakespeare for the amount of length and complexity, and take nigh on an hour to read. Netflix, you would expect to be a bit better at sharing content and information, but even so, you've got to wonder if it's really necessary to write 5,000, 6,000 words on the subject. And Google, a company famous for launching its brand off the back of a site that had just one thing on it, still want to use 6,000 or 7,000 words to tell you about their privacy policy and terms and conditions. So the question here is, are they writing badly, or are they writing so much because they actually don't want you to find all the information? Who knows? Bit of a conspiracy theory there, but I do sometimes wonder whether that's the case. And I don't know, this is just really fun, but I don't know whether it says anything about the state of modern dating, but Tinder has more to say about terms and conditions than Amazon does, despite its many services. When it comes to delivering bad news, this is a chap called Stephen Elop. If you're not familiar with Stephen, he has worked at some of the really big tech giants. He's worked at Nokia, he's worked at Microsoft twice. And in fact, he was at Microsoft when they acquired Nokia. And he was then part of something called the Devices Group, which already sounds a little bit stuffy, but we'll deal with Stuffy in a minute. When it comes to wordy, though, Stephen is something of a champion. So when companies merge, people have questions. People have questions about what it means for the company, what it means for their job. And so Stephen rightly wrote an email to staff about what was going to happen. It had 4 paragraphs. And then after those 4 paragraphs, it had another 5. And then after that, another 5, it had another 5. And the problem with all of this is that, first of all, people are really looking for really concrete information in all this, but also 11 paragraphs in, Stephen included this paragraph, actually the shortest one in the whole email. We planned that this would result in an estimated reduction of 12,500 factory direct and professional employees over the next year. These decisions are difficult for the team, and we plan to support departing team members with severance benefits. In other words, the single most important part of his entire email, the bit that tells people that their jobs may be at risk, is 11 paragraphs in with an awful lot of vague strategic waffle before he gets to this point. And this is something brands do a lot. It's a trap that lots and lots fall into, and it's about being really uncomfortable with delivering difficult news and wanting to put lots of justification around it before you get there. Nick mentioned information bias earlier, and this is a classic example of Tower Hamlets falling into the information bias trap. Really, almost everything on this sign, arguably, you need no words on this sign at all. You could replace the entire thing with a red line through it, and most people would understand what that meant. But even if you needed some words to explain what was going on, there is nothing after people have drowned that gives you any more reason to comply. In fact, the more information that's on there, the more work you give me to do, the more cognitive processing I have to do to understand this, the less likely I am to actually follow the information on the sign. There's also a danger that sometimes you just repeat the same information over and over again. Take care when walking around the hospital. It's very busy. Our corridors are used by many patients, staff, and visitors. Please make sure you look both ways when you leave these toilets. Advice that's not only unnecessary, but is likely to get you some very strange looks. So really not necessary to spell every tiny detail out. And in fact, when you do, most of what happens is that people forget it. So this was a piece of research done by Millward Brown about advertising and how many messages you needed to cram into each, you could cram into each advert and still expect people to take away your main point. And for some reason, the numbers don't actually add up to 100. We haven't quite worked out why, but we do know it's very clear to see that the more messages you try to cram in, the more likely it is that none of them are going to be remembered in their entirety. And certainly your main message is likely to be lost.
And that's quite a common thing, as agency people. We will often find that our briefs from our clients will say, here's message 1, message 2, message 3, message 4. And I guess, you can point to this and say, well, if you have 4 messages, people are less likely to take out the most important one. So maybe we should just focus on the one.
It's classic less is more.
Yeah.
So stuffy language, we'll have a little bit of audience participation. If you can pop your mics back on, if you're feeling like shouting out. a lot of the time, and stuffy language does appear in particular in cases like Stephen Eodorp's, is created when we think we have to use really formal, really professional sounding words to make our point, and we don't. And all of these kind of words that hover about and appear in presentations and articles and things all over again can be replaced with much, much simpler everyday words that we actually use. So what would you replace this word with? I get this all the time. This pops up in emails, it pops up on forms. What could you say instead of ensure?
Make?
Yeah. Or make sure.
Make sure.
Yeah, it's 2 words. It's okay to get longer if you're getting clearer. So, a few others coming up. Just shout a few, however.
But.
Absolutely. Acquire.
Buy.
Get.
Buy. Get. Exactly. Purchase.
Buy.
Buy.
Another one for buy, I think. And I mean, this is the net result of when you fall into that trap too often, because it's a sink. It really doesn't need this many words to tell you that it's not working. And sometimes it's not just the words, but also the syntax and the order that we put the words in that gets in the way and causes some of that cognitive friction. So parents, socks must be worn while in Ronald's PlayPlace. By who? It's a classic example of a passive sentence, a sentence where who's doing what isn't clear, or where the actual subject that you're trying to talk to is pushed somewhere towards the end of the sentence. And actually, are they talking about the parents wearing socks, the children wearing socks? Is it parents, make sure your children are wearing socks? We're talking to you, but they need to be the ones who are wearing it. You know, we're really frightened sometimes of being direct, and it's usually when we're worried that we're being too demanding or when we're delivering some bad news. But, you know, if there's one thing that you can do tomorrow to make your writing punchier and easier to understand, it's putting it in the active voice. And there's actually research that backs up that people just take longer to process passive sentences. Another really good example of when writing gets awkward because it's uncomfortable is this one. So what seems like a really great sign, written in ways that we would recommend, welcome, please feel free to eat your own lunch here, turns into a very formal sentence at the end because suddenly we're hugely uncomfortable telling you that there is a price for feeling free. So, you know, just that's where you see the formality creep in. And sometimes we think of this as the red wine test. So imagine for a moment that we were allowed to visit each other in our houses and that a friend of ours had an ill-advised white rug on the floor and the inevitable spillage happens. Brands make mistakes, companies make mistakes all the time. Things go wrong. But now imagine if you replied to your friend like this. Sorry, next slide. I'm sorry you weren't happy that I spilled wine all over your rug. Please accept my apologies for any inconvenience this may have caused. The accident was due to the increased slippage on the glass. As a gesture of goodwill, if you can send me your details, your cleaning costs will be refunded. Apologies you get from brands sound like this all the time. They're packed with passive sentences, will be refunded. They're packed with pointless explanations as well. Some of it that occasionally people might need to know why something happened or that it's not going to happen again, but most of the time, they just need to have 2 things, an apology and a way to fix things. What would actually happen is something more like this. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Let me grab a cloth. Let me pay for the dry cleaning. And our apologies on behalf of brands and on behalf of companies can sound this direct. It doesn't get us into any more trouble. In fact, it's much better at getting us out of it. And then the classic bullshitty example. So another bit of audience participation for this one, if you're feeling brave. Which buzzwords do you hate the most? It's a safe space. You can say whatever you like.
Synergy.
Synergy. Nice.
Unprecedented.
Very of the time.
Disruption.
Oh God, disruptive. Is it a disruptive brand?
State of the art.
State of the art.
Out of the box.
Ideate with no irony.
We've got an overarching as well in the chat.
Sustainable when they're not sustainable.
Helps if you're telling the truth.
I feel like I have to throw pivot into this as well.
Pivot. Oh, absolutely. Learnings. I'm not very fond of learnings. Not a big one of mine. Value add. Yeah, another nice one in the chat. Oh, God. Clearly, we're all feeling the pain of some of these. And actually, we have a list here of the most commonly used buzzwords, which, aside from a lot of them have falling into the exact same trap of not meaning very much or being desperately overused, if everyone's using them, then you don't stand out in any way, shape or form. This isn't even about going as far as the bizarreness effect. You just don't really sound very different. But innovative, innovator, innovation, all in there. Much, much better, I think, to show how you are innovative than to tell people that you are. So yeah, some classic big words there. And in fact, not to pick on poor Stephen, but I'm afraid he fell into this trap as well. So here's actually just that first paragraph from his famous or infamous job email. Microsoft's strategy is focused on productivity and our desire to help people do more, and they are at the confluence of the best of Microsoft's applications, operating systems, and cloud services. And I think my very favorite thing about all of this is there are two words in that whole paragraph that are really straightforward and clearly mean something, and they're the ones in scare quotes. You know, do more is the only bit of that email that was fairly straightforward. And there are lots of, I mean, this kind of example doesn't just happen in brands. So next up is a list of 4 points from the meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un, which resulted in this declaration. And the interesting thing about this isn't just the formality of the language, which you might expect in that kind of scenario, though we'd argue that they don't have to speak that way, but that a lot of this isn't actually promising to do anything at all. It's promising to promise. So when you look carefully, there are actually 3, I think, different mentions of committing to do something. Because when you commit to do something, then if it doesn't happen, you can just say, well, you committed to try. You didn't actually commit to do it. And it's a weaselly thing. It's a get out clause, and it doesn't sound confident, and it's not as clear in terms of writing. And that's where you get the sense of bullshittiness from writing sometimes. When you read something and it's hard to put your finger on why it doesn't sound quite right or why it doesn't sound authentic, look out for places where the writing is just refusing to land on something, ironically, where it's refusing to commit to something. So another example of that can simply be something that is nice writing in the sense that they're simple words, they're not complicated, they're not overly formal, but the context is all wrong. So this came from Barclays, I believe. So through these doors walk the loveliest people in the Vale, and you're one of them. Except that when you're walking through a bank store, at best, you're just in there to do something mundane and everyday. At worst, you've got some problems to sort out. Some, finances make people very stressed. It's usually, at an awkward time of day when you're trying to fit it in. So having this sort of really chummy tone of voice when you're walking into a bank just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right for the brand, it doesn't feel right for the situation. And that's where we get the kind of overlap between good writing 101, as we think of it, and tone of voice. And tone of voice is to writing as visual identity is to design, right? It's the personality, it's creating a sense of who the brand or company is as a person, if they were a person. And some brands are very, very good at it. And we thought, we've given you a lot of examples of things that don't work. We'll give you a few that work very, very clearly. So first up. Oh.
I know they've gone those.
They've gone. I'm sorry. Fine, I will show you them separately if you really want.
We're only interested in the bad stuff.
We're only interested in the bad stuff today, but I did have some lovely examples. And one of them was predictably Apple. So you can go find some great examples for yourself.
Yes, so that was, so there were these 3 problems, wordiness, stuffiness, and bullshittiness. So we've given you the problems. The next few slides are just some quick tricks that you can use if you're writing, or that you can look for in the writing that you're judging. to help you get over those three things. So the first one is this technique called the no, feel, do technique, which you may have come across, you may not. But if the best way of avoiding wordiness in your writing is to sit down before you've written anything and just ask yourself, what do I want my readers to know, feel, and do after they've read what I'm writing? And also, if you haven't got a very clear brief from a client, you can say to them, well, okay, what do you want people to know, feel, and do? You can get a quick, quite comprehensive, quick brief like that. So essentially, that's all you have to do. And then you know everything you want to write. And and then all you have to do is write the answers, and anything else you leave out. That's number one. That's how you get around wordiness. Stuffiness, all you have to do is write more like you speak. And we don't mean all the ums and ahs, that kind of stuff. It's just about using make sure rather than ensure, and buy rather than purchase, and the words that you'd really use in real life. You know, you don't say to your partner, can you ensure you purchase a pint of milk on the way home? It's something that you just don't do in real life. But for some reason, as soon as we get to work, we feel like, hang on, that's the way that we're supposed to write. But it's not, because it's just, that's not the way people like to read. The third point, how to get around bullshittiness. Alex actually mentioned this. Show, don't tell. So it's one of the age-old writing tricks. And just to show you what we mean, here's a lovely quote from Nigel Slater, the chef. If there is anything better to eat than a plate of hot, salty chips and an ice-cold beer, I have never found it. And this is just a masterclass in showing rather than telling. It's in the adjectives. It's the hot and the salty and the ice-cold. He really makes you taste it. Whereas if you look at a lot of the way that brands communicate, they would end up with this. If there is anything better to eat than a delicious plate of chips and a lovely beer, I have never found it. It's all these empty, vague adjectives. Alex mentioned innovative earlier. Delicious is another one. You're talking about food and drink. If you've earned the right to say something is delicious, there must be something delicious about it. So say that thing instead, right? So that could be that it's hot and salty chips, whatever else it is. But just say the fact, say the thing that actually is tangible rather than these vague things, vague adjectives. And a sort of 3.5 tip is to use content, tone, and structure as a way of, particularly of judging writing. So if you're reading a piece of writing that a copywriter has done and you want to sort of check whether it feels ready to go to the client, and maybe you think, it's really good, but there's something not quite right about it. If you break down your thoughts according to content, the tone, and the structure, that will help you pinpoint the problem, if there is one. So content is just what the thing is saying. What's the message? Tone is, how does it sound? Is it in the brand's tone of voice? Or if they don't have one, does it feel like the brand? Does it feel right for them? You know, we saw the Barclays example earlier. We would say, content, probably unnecessary. Tone, completely wrong for Barclays. Structure was fine. So the structure is just the order of the information we're talking about. And if we go back to the memory test there, you know, you can remember it's important to put something important first and last, and maybe to repeat something, but not too much, and maybe to surprise people with some information. So content, tone, and structure, and it will really help you to give the feedback in those terms. So you can say the content and structure are great, but the tone is a little bit off, for example. And so if you're sitting there thinking, this is all very well for you to talk about, but my clients or my boss or whoever won't go with this sort of writing, this clear, more human style of writing, there is some science that proves it's not just sort of fluffy, nice to have stuff. It actually it works. So the first is this brilliantly named paper, Consequences of Erudite Vernacular Utilized Irrespective of Necessity or Problems with Using Long Words Needlessly. So what Danny Oppenheimer did was he took one piece of writing and he rewrote it. So he took quite a complex, formal, a wordy, stuffy and bullshitty piece of writing, and he rewrote it to be clear and human. So exactly the same content, just a different tone. And then he put each piece of writing in front of several hundred subjects. And he asked them, who's the more intelligent author? And they overwhelmingly said the one who'd written the clear human version. And I think that goes against what somehow we're all taught. We're sort of taught that you have to use this sort of formal, long words. You have to really labor the point, throw every piece of information at it. We're taught that that's the right way to do things, but actually it's not. It's the exact opposite. The more human and clear you are, the more intelligent people will think you are. And the second and last piece of evidence, and there's loads more if you Google it, but these are my two favorites. If anyone's read this book, Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, you might have seen this study from Nalini Ambady, where she wanted to see if there was a correlation between the way surgeons communicated, so the tone of voice of surgeons, and the number of times they got sued. And she found that there was. And that the more sort of cold and clinical the surgeons were in their tone of voice, the more likely they were to get sued, irrespective of controlled for ability as well. And the ones who had a more human bedside manner were much less likely to get sued than the others. So, two bits of evidence that this stuff isn't just nice to have. It is powerful when you use it in a brand writing context. And the golden rule that I promised you at the very beginning, which I'm sure you all do already, but yes, you can start a sentence with "and." In writing for a while now, and I would say this is the thing that most clients react most, that seems like it's the most controversial rule of all the ones that we ever tell them. But it's true, you really can, and actually it helps you. And we're not saying overdo it, but it really helps you to space out your information, to make sure you've only really got one main point in your sentence, because too many points in a sentence is what confuses readers a great deal. So you can do it, the Bible does it, all the good newspapers do it, all the good novelists do it. It's just business writing that is yet to catch up, but it's time. And yeah, that is everything from us. I think we have time for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Nick
you.
and Alex. That was really good. I'll try and get quite a lot of people on the call. I'll keep an eye out in the chat, and if I can see lots of faces now, put your hand up and take yourself off mute if you'd like to ask a question to either Alex or Nick. Anybody want to go first? I can see Vicky. Pick on you. Do you want to go?
Hello. Thank you so much for your talk. I've learned so much. It's really, really great. I just wondered if you had any books you would recommend reading to kind of learn more about copy, because I've kind of done some research and there seems to be loads. So I just wondered if you had any top 3 or anything.
That's a really good question. I was thinking the same thing. Definitely.
Yeah, well, I would be remiss in not recommending our founder's book. It's called Brilliant Business Writing, and it is essentially a longer version of what we've just gone through. So all the basics, and it's really, it's a good, easy read as well. It's not overly complex or anything like that. It's a fun read, a quick read.
His name is Neil Taylor, by the way.
Yes, true. I left out the important bit of information.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, I have one. Oh, there you go, Julia.
Hiya, thanks for that. That was awesome. Lovely to hear everything. I've got a random one. So what about if your target audience speaks in Bullshitty?
Asking lots of questions, I would say. What does this actually mean is a good question.
And also, a lot of people, just because someone speaks in that doesn't mean that's what they want to read. And you get sometimes something called the curse of knowledge, which is where writers tend, or anyone who is communicating a piece of information to another person will assume that the audience knows as much about the subject as they do. And this particularly happens when we get sometimes clients who go, well, this is an academic audience, or they know all the things. It's like, but not everyone is a specialist in everything, and they're all humans too. So even if they respond in a kind of bullshit speak, that's not necessarily what they want to read, and it's not necessarily what's going to get them to do what you want them to do. It's probably
Thank you.
answer.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else? So, yeah, Jim, hello, how are you? I think you might be on mute. No.
It doesn't say mute, but we can't hear you.
Yeah. Oh.
Do you want to write it in the chat?
Yeah, pop it in the chat, Jim, if that's okay. So I'll ask one if that's if you got a chance to do that, Jim. So Alex or Nick, I swear quite a lot when I talk, and but I think it's really inappropriate to do that in any form of written communication. When do you think it might be appropriate for a brand to swear in their communications? And have you seen examples of that?
It's really funny. One of the examples that we're going to have of tone of voice, which we took out, was Brewdog, and their sign said "sober as a mother," and it didn't finish the sentence. And it's beautiful because they didn't technically swear, but you've all finished the sentence in your head, and it works for them to a T. I think if you have a grown-up audience, you can. The only thing I would say there is if you're a global brand, it can land really differently in different cultures. So actually a friend of mine who is also a copywriter wrote an article the other day about how when she moved from this country to Germany, when she writes for different audiences, they have different reactions to the amount of swearing. So Germans were actually super comfortable with loads of swearing, but then they'd write in business English for an English audience and the Brits would get a little bit scared by it. So it is, I think, knowing your audience most importantly.
Okay. Let's see. Anybody else like to put a question to Nick or Alex?
Nick and Alex, I'll ask a question. I think we have seen some really terrific human writing on packaging and in branding, and people are really adopting a human approach. But do you think if everyone does it, we kind of lose a bit of differentiation?
Yeah, well, there was the wackaging craze, wasn't there, a few years back, and it just became a bit of a cliche. And I think that's down to the likes of Barclays adopting it. As soon as Barclays have got your tone of voice, I think that's the point where it's died. But it's a tricky one because your tone of voice should be a complete mirror of who you are, what your personality is as a brand. So if your personality is human and warm and fuzzy, then that's sort of how you have to communicate. So it's down to that. If you want to differentiate, you need to do it with your personality. And I think we're probably seeing a bit less of that fuzzy tone now. There was definitely a trend towards a sort of artisan tone of voice that seemed to be coming through a few years back.
I think also the ones who can live with it the longest are the ones who do it the best. So innocent can carry on being innocent for a really long time because they've really committed to it everywhere. Like even in an apology, even in a difficult piece of communication, they will carry on being themselves. And it was awkward for Barclays because that is not the same tone as you will find if they send you a letter because you're overdrawn. So if you commit all through and do it really well, I think you can probably get away with it for longer.
Yeah, and there are so few who do it all the way through to the terms and conditions. Even the small nooks and crannies. That's the bit where you really win people over, is when they see a piece of writing that would normally be really formal, but it's in your tone of voice.
So do you think in larger organizations, this sort of brand tone of voice needs to be documented and people need educating on? Yeah,
definitely. A lot of people think of tone of voice as one slide in a brand guidelines deck with 3 adjectives on it, which are usually bold, what else?
Optimistic
and trusted. I defy anyone to write in a trusted tone of voice. I don't know how you do that. But that's sort of that's step one. And the point after that is a lot of training and a lot of coaching and a lot of writing high profile things that people see. For one of our clients, we rewrote the signature at the bottom of all their emails. So suddenly there's a bit of evidence of the tone of voice that's in everyone's inbox every day, all the time. And there are these pieces of writing that feel insignificant, but actually have a much bigger footprint than you might think.
So I don't even know if this is a question more than more of a statement really, but before I worked here, I worked for the Drum, and if we'd be running some in-house campaigns, quite often we just see people as a wordsmith, and we go to the journalists to provide copy and some advertising copy with the call to action. It was the worst thing we could ever have done because they were just badged as the wordsmiths within the company, and I think that's something to bear in mind, isn't it? Just badging somebody as being a wordsmith and being an expert at different types of copy isn't a great thing. There are different skills to it.
Absolutely, and so there's lots of different kinds of training that people need as well, because there's training for the wordsmiths, the actual wordsmiths, and then there's training for the people who produce huge amounts of words but aren't writers or don't think of themselves as writers. And sometimes they have different stresses. That we did some work recently with some people who have an academic part to it and a research part, and they actually said to us, the one thing we can't do from the tone of voice is the active voice, because when you write a research paper, it has to sound objective, so you have to do it in passive language. So we had to make an exception for them, because actually there is a really strict guideline for how they present certain pieces of work, and we went, fine, you can do everything else, just don't do that. But sometimes you have to work with people who produce huge amounts of written work but would never think of themselves as a writer.
Julia,
just following up on that, actually, I'm thinking about our team and the fact that I definitely could point at a couple of my colleagues who perhaps you say, you know, being authentic to whom you are and the way you speak and writing in the same way. But actually, the way these two people do, actually, they are really formal in the way they speak, even on a day-to-day basis. And so when they write an email, they write to us, or you know, anything comes back through to us on Slack, is clearly very, very authentic to who they are. And my approach has always been, even when we produce content that is authored by our people, we normally tell that is by our people as opposed to by our agency, for example. So I've always said to people that they should stick to their own tone of voice and be true to who they are. And I'm wondering if that's a problem. I don't think it is, but I'm wondering if the fact that it's not truthful to the rest of the tone of voice, for example, that might be a little bit more, just a little bit, not necessarily friendlier, but clearer or just different.
It probably depends on the context and the audience. So, I mean, like, we have a blog on the Schwa website where everybody writes under their own name, so they could write as themselves. Now, because we all write for Schwa and because we all kind of believe in the same kind of good writing, probably quite hard to tell the difference between some pieces, but you will see some tells where you know that, you know, I can probably tell a few people's different writing from certain quirks that come up over and again. But as long as they're communicating clearly, and if it's not a sort of public showcase where you need to be consistent, it's not necessarily a problem.
Super, thank you.
So who's your brand guardian at Schwa? Do you have the copy police?
Well, we all check each other's work. So everything that goes to anyone goes through another member of the team first. So we are all responsible.
Excellent.
Vicky.
Hello. I just had a question about tone of voice for, say, your website and your emails. But then I worked for an agency earlier in this year, and they kind of said that to brands that they had to adopt a new tone of voice for their Instagram account, say, that's a bit more snappy and a bit more attention grabbing. Then maybe they'd have, like, I think it was OVO Energy was the client, or whatever, someone like that. And they were kind of saying, you know, for your Instagram, you should have a different tone of voice. And I just wondered what you thought about that, and if it's important to change for what platform you're on with social media, or.
I'll let you say this one, Nick. Your favorite topic, flex.
Your favorite topic. Alex is our social media guru as well, so I feel like this is yours.
Fine. My argument would be, if your tone of voice has to change for a particular channel, then your tone of voice doesn't work. And if it's desperately important that you have a very chatty tone of voice on social, then you probably need to fix all your other channels to match that. So if it's a tone of voice for your brand, then it needs to be consistent everywhere. Otherwise, it would be very hard to tell your communications from anyone else, either in your industry or anywhere else. I think there's a sense that because social media are social, that everyone has to behave like an individual on there. But to be honest, almost all brand social content now is paid anyway. It's paid advertising if anyone's actually going to see it. So it sort of feels disingenuous and inauthentic to pretend that it's not as well. So my personal feeling is that while you might make some very slight adjustments, so like we said with the academic team, we made a very slight adjustment because they had a particular limitation. I'm not a big fan of, if your tone of voice flexes a lot, what bit of it is your authentic tone of voice? Would be my question.
Yeah, this is my bugbear. Flex is my complete. I just there's almost an assumption that you have to build. There has to be a page in your tone of voice guidelines that is about how the tone of voice flexes. It's there from the beginning, but you can't flex a tone of voice. It just doesn't work in the same way that other tools do. You can't be this. If you're writing like this over here and like that over there, that's two different tones of voice, which might be fine, and that might be what you want to go for, but it's not one.
Also, I think sometimes it's solved by changing the content. So sometimes people go, but what if we're writing to a really technical audience and we want to use technical terms? That's fine. Technical terms don't necessarily change your tone of voice. It's something that it's a language that they understand, but it doesn't necessarily change how you speak or how you sound. You're still you delivering the same information. It's just that, okay, fine, everyone in this room definitely understands this acronym, then we'll use the acronym. And then that's fine.
My son's 12 and I'm trying to keep up with his WhatsApp groups. They use an acronym for just every other word at the moment. I cannot keep up. It's a secret code. I have no idea what they're talking about.
Probably better if we don't know.
It's exactly, it's a probably good idea. Well, that leads us right up to 6 o'clock. Unless anybody has anything else that they wanted to ask, I'll bring us to a on-time close, shall I? That was, I think I can speak on behalf of everybody, and I've seen some nice comments in the chat room. That was brilliant. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much. Really insightful and really interesting. And thanks for giving up the time and joining us, Nick and Alex. Round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much. That's great.
Nice.
Everybody else on the call, every 2 weeks, the next one, we're going to delve into the platform that's TikTok. And after that, remember Sir Martin Sorrell's going to join us. And then after that, the last one of the year in mid-December, we've got a speed mentoring session. So please keep an eye out for the future GreenJams. And great to see so many faces. Have a wonderful evening.